from Twitter. We're going to start with the question from Substack, Daniel N. He says, I'm assuming the young core as it stands is LaMelo, Miller, and Mark Williams, and the Hornets look primed to have at least one more high draft pick to add to that. If you had to choose one skill set, would you prioritize offensive rim pressure or elite defensive versatility / intensity with this selection? So this is a pretty cool question, even though I think it's hard to pinpoint a single skill and a single draft pick, because you don't want to necessarily be drafting a guy based, solely on something, because you're going to be dismissing other skills. But for the hypothetical of this question, it's a pretty cool one to think about, because when you look at this Hornets roster, Brian, like rim pressure is not a thing that comes in the method of a wing or a guard. They can use the pick and roll situation with Mark Williams. You can get rim pressure that way, but there's not a ton of guys that can drive, withstand contact, put pressure on the rim, and do it, effectively. When I look at this roster, like LaMelo, like he kind of added that to his game this year, but his efficiency hasn't gotten to the point, where you would like it. Bridges has that in his game, but there's some uncertainty with his future. And then, like, who else? McGowan's, I guess, but he's so low on the depth chart. Like, it's like you're not going to justify him out on the court just because he can attack the rim. So, it's an important thing to have, I think. But having said all that, I think I actually lean towards the other way. A player with the defensive intensity, size, versatility. If I had to choose one, obviously you don't ever evaluate one player based on one skill. So I think regardless of how you feel about previous coaches, current coaches, the Hornets defensive personnel has always been lacking. They're missing size, they're missing versatility, they're missing any kind of real resistance that doesn't put the team in a constant rotation early. And so if you just look at the last handful of years for defensive rating, it's always been like 20, maybe like 18 or high, at the highest, but like it's on the bottom end. And this season they're like 28th or 29th. So I think the same reason you would want a player to kind of break down the defense is the same reason why I would want the Hornets to target a guy in the draft that would do the opposite, that would prevent opposing teams to break down a defense. So I think this is a very interesting question, Brian. Which way do you lean, and the benefits of both players that would have these skills?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to address just even I think this listener, this reader addressed the two sort of biggest concerns, but there's just so many issues with the roster. Anyone listening to this could list off probably a dozen of them immediately. But I think these are the two that are sort of like at front of brain most often. Uh, the defensive concern really does make you wish they had perhaps prioritize Jalen McDaniels a little bit last year. Maybe he's not quite the defensive stopper or enough of an offensive player to sort of like justify a starting role or something like that. But they had a pretty interesting young wing defender that could do some stuff on and off the ball that they just sort of punted on at the deadline last season. I'll go opposite of you, Richie, though I see where you're coming from. Like, I just tend to lean offense on these things, and I would love for them to have not just like a source of like rim pressure, which they do need. They need someone in the guard room or in the wing room that can like heat up the rim with a live dribble. Um, because like they're what probably top 6, 7 in the league right now in terms of shots at the percentage of shots at the rim. But I think a fair amount of that is, you're getting dives to the rim with the centers, you're getting putback attempts, like, and that's probably boosting those numbers up a little bit. This is still one of the worst spot up offenses in the league. I believe they're bottom 3 in efficiency on spot ups, along with the Pistons, of course, who almost don't count, and the Spurs, who kind of don't count and are often playing without like a point guard on the floor if Trey Jones isn't even in the game. But just like the ability to create slash and kick, the ability to get downhill, get into the paint, to draw fouls. They just need the ability to like have someone that can reliably get into the paint. We saw some of this with LaMelo, and like maybe with with more health and some strength development, maybe that's something LaMelo can slide into a little bit more. As we've discussed a millions of times on this podcast, including several recent episodes with LaMelo, like it would still be nice to have someone that would allow LaMelo to also get off the ball and spot up and be a connective passer at times too. This was the argument for, a Scoot Henderson pick at number 2 and a LaMelo Scoot Henderson backcourt perhaps to build on. And Brandon Miller's played great. I think he's had a really nice offensive season for a 21-year-old rookie, but only 22% of his shots at the rim. You frequently see him sort of like flummoxed by physical point of attack defense or switches, drop coverage, like stuff that would kind of lure him into contested or tough, pull-up shots. Over 40% of his looks right now are coming from the mid-range. A lot of that, some of that's, movement sets, but a lot of that's, one-on-one or pick and roll. So just having someone that can reliably play with the ball, do that would be a huge, huge deal. And then maybe if you find that source of creation to be able to like slot in with LaMelo and with Brandon Miller, well then, maybe Miller can end up being your, sort of like your ace wing defender going forward without having to carry such a large offensive load. We'll see, how his development dovetails. And look, the Hornets may have to get a top 2 or 3 selection in the draft to get this guy, but a name that everyone likely knows about, Ron Holland, who's currently playing for the G League Ignite. I mean, he's probably being mocked 1 or 2 or maybe 3, probably no lower than 3 in most 2024 mock drafts, but 6'8", 200-pound, athletic wing, very athletic, can do stuff with the ball, and I think there's some real defensive upside there, both on the ball and as a team defender. So maybe that's a name to settle, but or to sort of like consider at the moment. Obviously, we're a ways off from that, but I'll go offensive shot creation, but I don't know just to go ahead and put a pin in it, they need more two-way players. I think is also like what's probably something we should address like with this question, which is that like they have very few guys that you can trust on both sides of the court right now. Like maybe 3, 4,
Right.
like, Miller, Hayward when he's healthy, Mark, maybe PJ, like that's
Yeah.
probably about it. And so that's nowhere, it's just nowhere near enough. So just add it to the list of concerns.
Yeah, and even those guys are inconsistent, on a night-to-night basis. But yeah, those are the 4 that stick out to me. And you're right in terms of like the spot up situations. It's something that, when you think of rim pressure, obviously it's about converting at the rim, but it's also about opening up looks from behind the arc, and adding shooters is definitely one way to do that. But you need personnel that's going to collapse the defense and make those looks easier and cleaner. The Hornets this season are shooting. They are 25th in the league in terms of shot distribution from behind the arc, and they're 22nd in the league in efficiency. So they don't have the shooters to begin with, but they also don't have the volume either. So I think adding a guy on the offensive end that can collapse the defense, pressure the rim, that would go a long way. I guess one question kind of like this kind of dovetails off of this conversation. You just said it perfectly. Like this team needs two-way players in the worst possible way. And I think every player is different. So maybe this question really can't be answered. Is it easier to have a guy that has like the effort, the intensity, the size on defense to develop kind of like the on the ball skills, or do you think it's easier for a guy that has the on the ball skills to develop some kind of intensity on defense? It's probably so hard to judge that, I guess.
Yeah, it's just so case by case. I
Yeah.
do think, and there's probably examples you could pick for both. I tend to think there's like a premium, especially, and I think it probably even varies by position to an extent. Like at center, there's probably a bit of a premium put on like aside from like the real outlier guys, Jokic and Embiid, there's like an emphasis and a premium put on defense. And so even if you can turn Rudy Gobert into a screen and roll guy and an offensive rebounder, and that's what the Hornets are going to try to do with Mark Williams. Whereas like on the wings and in the guard room, you're scouting and drafting and probably thinking offense first. Again, sort of depends, but ultimately, I would think you would try to find shot creation talent, like shooting, shot creation. Those are the two most, important and difficult and most coveted skills to find. So, going for, I guess I would answer that would be like you try to go that and then hope you can figure out the defense, or like putting a defense around a player like that, to sort of be able to find a scheme that works for them, find teammates that work for them, um, and go from there. But yeah, I think the answer is offense first, and then figure out defense.
Yeah,
But
it's probably case by
it,
case. Um,
yeah.
do you agree with the premise of this question that Mark, Miller, and LaMelo are the core? Like, is there another guy that you would add to that, or are the others more expendable in your eyes?
I think that's also the right answer too. I mean, I think if you polled 1,000 people that follow the Hornets, fans or media, and said pick three guys, you have pick the young core, you got three selections. I think that would be the vast majority. And I mean, I think there's some interesting, good young players on the roster too. Like I, I think Nick Smith has shown some stuff this season. I think we liked him as a prospect. Um, I thought Bryce McGowan's had a nice, rookie season as a second round pick, and has been okay in doses this year. So it's like they've gotten. I haven't bailed on JT Thor yet, which Richie, you and I, or Spencer, we discussed along with Spencer, we discussed him the other week. So like there's still some stuff, but I would say that's clearly the core. And then there's a few other young guys that I think have like a real pulse in terms of maybe being a part of things going forward. Um, and I think like Lamelo and Miller are like the real two sort of like
Right.
standouts, but certainly Mark is deserving of consideration there too.
Yeah. It's funny coming from you. I'm surprised you didn't say PJ.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good point. I mean, like I would say PJ's almost in a category to himself, because like I think you could consider him part of like the core moving forward. I think, granted, he's already on a second contract. Um you could also consider him in like it feels weird to put him in like the Nick Smith Jr., Bryce McGowan's group, because PJ's so much more established than those guys are. And he's not quite in or maybe he is in like the Hayward, Rozier part of the roster where you really need to be thinking about, and I guess Bridges too, like what you could get for trading those guys. But PJ is sort of like in between all of
Yeah.
these things, I think.
Yeah. It's kind of like his game. He's very versatile. He could go anywhere.
Yeah,
He
yeah, yeah,
it's hard.
yeah. And I mean, I think he's like I just watched the Phoenix game earlier today. I thought he did some good stuff in that game, but yeah, I think the young core is I think pretty ironclad with those three.
Yes, I would agree with Daniel in on that question. And we will get to the second question here, which is almost like two questions within one. It's from Hear Me Out on Twitter. Who has shown the most growth, whether it's rookies or returning players, and who has shown the most decline, whether it's rookies or returning players? So I guess we'll just kind of split this up. I don't know if we'll have the same answer for this, but I think the biggest growth to me, currently injured, LaMelo Ball. Like if you just go back and watch and look up his games in the middle of November, that might have been his best stretch ever for any time in the Hornets uniform. I think there is like some stuff on the fringes that probably is not worth highlighting with him, but there is some noticeable stuff that he's clearly improved upon. And we just mentioned this in the question prior, like he's getting to the rim more often. Last season, he was attempting 4.2 shots in the restricted area. This season, he's attempting 5.9 shots in the restricted area. If you're looking at it from like a percentage standpoint, 29% of his shots are coming at the rim compared to 21% last year. So he's just getting there more often. He's getting more points from the area. I don't necessarily think his efficiency has gone up all that much. But even a byproduct of this, he's getting to the line a little bit more often. So I think that's one area of his game where he's shown some growth. Lastly, I think his 3-point shot has improved even more. This is something that always is going to be a part of his game. In terms of the pull up, especially, like it's taken a step this season. 45% of his above the break threes have been unassisted. That number was 37.9 last year. And I know that pull-ups and unassisteds don't always equate. Like they're not always the same thing and vice versa. But he's shooting 39% on pull-up threes this year. That was 34.8 last year. So he's definitely shown some ability to get points off the bounce from behind the arc. And then when teams kind of load up the paint because there's no other shooters and they know that they love to use that two-man game with Mark Williams, like, obviously he's not going to be able to drive through all five of those guys every single time. So pulling up from deep is a very good counter to have, and he can definitely do it with range as well. So I was just kind of running my finger up and down the roster, trying to figure out, okay, who has shown the most growth. I think a lot of guys have kind of like flatlined. Like I don't see a lot of noticeable, things to point to. But I think LaMelo Ball, even though he's injured right now, he's kind of out of sight, out of mind. I think those are a couple things that I've noticed this year that have grown very visibly on the screen.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I don't think there's like much. There's maybe some other guys you could mention, like even maybe Brandon Miller, just compared to like start of season versus what he's doing now. Just sort of like the added responsibility he's had to have with Rozier going down, and then LaMelo, and now Hayward. So I think there's maybe a case to be made for Miller, but short of that, we just have so much more to work off of with LaMelo, and his growth. I think to start the season was meaningful. I think it was significant. More patience in the pick and roll, willing to do the sort of Steve Nash, Tony Parker, keep the dribble alive as you're going underneath the rim, come out the other side and, use the rim as an extra defender and try to score that way or kick out to someone on the second side. His pick and roll efficiency, albeit in this fairly small sample to start the season, was pretty good after a slow start. LaMelo on pick and roll possessions that he used this season. This is almost close to like half. This is like almost half the possessions he had this year. 0.98 points per possession with 55% effective shooting. Last year, that was 0.81 points per possession with 46% effective shooting. And again, these are smaller samples, so you shoot pretty well. And that's probably going to, it's going to boost some of those points per possession totals. LaMelo, 42% on pick and roll threes this season. So again, that's probably helping those numbers out a little bit. But last season, LaMelo, 34% on pick and roll threes. So again, some just, at least in a smaller sample, certainly some very real tangible growth in this season with LaMelo in the pick and roll, either using the possession or passing it to someone who uses the possession. Again, this is according to Synergy, so these numbers aren't perfect, but they're a pretty good look into just how the team is playing in those situations. 1.06 points per possession. That's in the 73rd percentile in the NBA. That's up also from last season where it was 0.95 points per possession. That was in the 44th percentile. And given the struggles that this team has in terms of like secondary creation, some of the spot up shooting concerns, we just talked about how infrequent they've been able to get clean looks from catch and shoot threes and how infrequently they've been able to make those this season. Like LaMelo's doing a lot of that but with the context not being anywhere close to like ideal for like a young guard to like thrive, right? And obviously they're really missing him from a shot creation standpoint. So I think LaMelo, for all the reasons we've sort of just gone into, the added rim pressure, a little bit more patience here and there, a few more tricks, and shooting well on pull-up threes out of the pick and roll. That to me, I've said this for years now. Like if LaMelo ever really like turned the corner as like a pick and roll pull-up 3-point shooter, because we know he's got the touch and the range, but if that really translated to pull-up looks, and if that could alter the way teams guard him. Like we're not there yet, obviously, probably not even close because the team is just not nearly good enough for one guy to sort of like geek out opposing coverages. But perhaps one day down the line, that could be something you forced, point of attack defenders to fight over the screen and bring guys up to the level, the screen defender, then teammates going to be open on the roll, or you open up, you get the defense in rotation. So, some really encouraging stuff, honestly, to start the season from LaMelo. It just stinks that he got hurt because, we haven't seen him play in some time now.
Yeah, exactly. All right, there's a second part of this question, Brian, and I'm going to let you lead off on this one in terms of the one that has dipped most. And I think there's probably several answers here, or at least several candidates for answers. I think JT Thor is in consideration, even if, maybe his baseline wasn't the highest, so he doesn't really have far to drop. But I feel like he's disappointed this season. I know he's only 21 years old, but I feel like his shot from behind the arc has really declined, even though he's kind of living more outside the arc and shooting more from behind the arc. You could potentially argue Mark Williams has seen a dip defensively and, really hasn't jumped off the page there. There's probably 3-4 other players that you could probably argue here. So I think that's a bad thing. That's really a bad thing when you got like
Yeah.
5 players that you can sit here and argue for the biggest decline for the 2023 season here. So what's your thought on this?
Yeah, and look, I think Terry's had a really nice offensive season, but his defense has been terrible. Not like it's ever been that good, but that's been rough. I mean, Cody Martin's played well since he got back, but just 4 games this season. Like, I think you were probably expecting a little bit more out of him. Granted, he didn't play much last year, so there's not. It's hard to sort of like gauge like where the starting place is and how do you evaluate him. It sort of seems like we should still be in keep your fingers crossed that he stays healthy and he continues to play. And then there's more stuff to actually evaluate him on. I mean, I'll just come out and say it. Like, I think it's Miles Bridges. Like, the shooting is down, way down. I don't think the shot selection's been good at times. I think the effort and attention to detail on defense have been pretty pathetic, actually. Not like that was ever like a strong suit of his, but I think it's been pretty worrisome. He strikes me as a guy that is pretty checked out on that side of the court. And look, that's far from the most disappointing part of Miles Bridges' human being. But Miles Bridges, the basketball player, I think has also taken a pretty obvious step back, at least after his first, I guess, week of game action
Right.
after coming back from his suspension. So plenty to choose from in this regard. Yeah, it does feel like Mark sort of. I don't know if Mark like regressed necessarily. I think he just sort of. We're doing that thing with young guys where like he largely stayed the same instead of there being some sort of growth. Like maybe the defense wasn't quite as impactful. There's probably a lot of factors that go into that with a really poor defensive team and poor perimeter defensive personnel around Williams, guarding pick and roll at the point of attack. Richie, you and I multiple times have discussed sort of like the lack of quickness and flexibility guarding pick and pop shooters from both of Charlotte's top 2 centers with Williams and Richards. So there's that as well. I think Williams maybe kind of is what he is offensively, and who knows, perhaps he figures out way to be a little bit more of a high post, elbow dribble handoff hub at some point in time. But it's not like he came in as a great passer, and certainly like we hadn't seen that yet this season, or it's not like we expected him to be a stretch 5 this season or something like that. So, and then of course he's missed a ton of time now with this back injury, which is
Yeah.
really unfortunate too. So lots to choose from, but I'll say Bridges.
It's good. That's a good answer. I wasn't really thinking about him only because of the fact that he's been gone for so long. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so I do like that answer. I think that's a very reasonable answer. But I think you're going to hate my answer, Brian. But I'm gonna go PJ.
Yeah. I had a feeling.
I want your thoughts on him in a second, but I think he is one guy on this roster that we just talked about who is versatile. He can play 2 ways. And we've seen that in his time in Charlotte, where he is a versatile 2-way player, but it feels like he's been less impactful this season. And his 3-point shot has declined this season. He's only making 32% of his above the break threes. He's only made 9 corner threes all season. And I also feel like, just from the eye test, that his defense has taken a little bit of a dip this season. And that's a place where I felt like I can always count on his impact. I've seen too many times where there's been on the ball miscues where a guy gets by him a little bit too easily. So, obviously I'm not giving up on him by any means. He's a guy I pose to you, like, where does he fall in the core? He is that guy that's like right underneath like the solid 3 or 4 players that are going to be moving forward with this team. And his contract is very team friendly. Like he's a guy that if he steps up, he is going to outperform his contract. And I get it. Like everyone else on this team, he has not had the best situation. He's been a starter. He's come off the bench. Obviously, the injuries have just changed everyone's role. But I think it's hard to kind of pull away the excuses and his play. And I think we just need to see more individual improvement from all the guys on the roster. But I feel like he's kind of had a very similar impact as Hayward, where he's had stretches where it's like, wow, like this is the guy that we've been wanting to see. And then he has stretches like kind of like Hayward, where he kind of goes absent for 4 or 5 straight games. So, just an honest answer, Brian. Like, what have your thoughts been on PJ this season compared to like previous seasons?
Yeah, it hasn't been as I don't think it's been his best, and who knows, maybe like 3 weeks of him shooting 40 whatever percent on above the break threes, like it will change some of that perception. He is shooting, he's really struggling with his three ball this year, under 31%. Still on plenty of attempts. I actually think he's taken a career high in terms of threes per 100 possessions. After that had points of the last couple of seasons, really peaked, and it's gone up even more this season. PJ is someone that I think last season it was pretty well documented, like with Hayward hurt, with Bridges suspended, PJ and LaMelo hurt. They were starred for guys that could like initiate offense. It wasn't always the prettiest, but PJ got to do stuff. Got to do some pick and roll ball handling. Got to facilitate from the high post a little bit. Got to isolate here and there. And now he's more in that sort of like catch and shoot, catch and go role. The 5-out lineups with him as small ball center haven't quite hit. And that's always been like those lineups have always struggled to defend. They've struggled to rebound, but they usually were pretty awesome and pretty powerful offensively. And that just hasn't. I would need to check the actual like offensive efficiency numbers with those looks. My guess is it's really not all that great. But yeah, I think some of it can be chalked away to his role changing. He's playing a lot of minutes at center again. Not like he hasn't done that before, but that was sort of like largely something that I gotten weeded out last season with the return of Steve Clifford. Now he's back to doing that a lot with Mark Williams out and only 2 true centers. I guess 3 if you want to count some of the contributions from Nathan Mensah, who I thought had some play pretty well in doses for the Hornets. The last week or so. So kudos, salute to him. But PJ's got to start shooting better from threes. And I'm with you in terms of like overall defense. This is a terrible defensive team. This is just a bad team in general. So it's like it's tough to read too much into like lineup data. Like they're losing most lineups like this. They're not good. And I think perhaps when you're in the midst of a big losing slide, you're bad on that side of the court. It's sort of tough to like keep the same effort and keep contributing at the rate that you're expected to. But yeah, it has been a little bit disappointing in terms of I don't think he's been quite as impactful on that side of the floor. And I do think like this also does speak to offensively, like he is a complimentary player. Like again, we've seen moments with him getting to create, and maybe there's still some untapped stuff there, but what mostly right now his role is like playing off the catch and being a second side guy and being a pick and pop guy. And when the jump shot's not rolling, then it's tough for that to like really sort of take off. But like he's a good shooter. Like I do think he'll start to like shoot it. I don't think he's going to finish the season shooting under 32% on threes. I think that number will sort of jump to the mid to upper 30s, and hopefully that opens up some other parts of PJ's game.
Yeah, I think the situation makes it very difficult to judge anyone. But we're going to go ahead and wrap here. But I wanted to make everyone aware of a couple things before we sign off. If you are a Spotify listener like BG is, there's a place within each episode to leave comments and questions. It's a new feature that I kind of stumbled upon. I'm going to look more into it and probably use it moving forward. If you're an Apple Podcast listener like myself, please make sure to give us a rating and review. We've been stuck on 175 reviews for a couple months now. So maybe someone out there can be our 176th review. And lastly, if you'd like a place to chat with us and other Hornets fans, download the Substack app, search BuzzBeat, and there's a chat tab where you guys can start threads and and join a conversation with others. So thanks to all that joined live. Continue to support us by listening. Continue to support us by